tell us a bit about your community involvement, Mary?
Well, I was quite involved because having been a teacher, but one of the other control center operators worked with Bob, name of Ed Newcomb. He was Bob's best man at our wedding.
Oh, I see.
Decided that with kids growing up on a hydro project, they should know how to swim.
Right.
So he talked me into going with him down to Lethbridge to take a Red Cross swimming and water safety course. We had to get our bronze medallions in order to qualify as instructors.
Mhm.
Then we came back and started the summer swim classes.
Right.
First we worked over at Beaufort Lake, where Nakota Lodge is now.
Okay.
It was then Camp Chief Hector, run by
Right.
the YMCA.
Okay.
And the camp was running on double daylight saving time, I think it was.
So 2 hours difference.
2 hours different. So we used to go over during their noon hour and use the lake. We had no change rooms or anything, but we just
Found a way.
toweled off and
Yeah.
drove home and got changed.
Yeah.
And we taught there for several years. I can't remember just how many. And then the Anglican Church built a summer camp over closer to Seebe,
Mhm.
and in the process struck an artesian well. So somebody said, quick, build a swimming pool. The swimming pool was filled with water from the artesian well with no heat. We taught one summer over there. It was all right for the older kids because they could keep moving, but the little kids just turned blue standing around in this cold water. So the next summer,
It was flowing water then too, wasn't it?
yeah,
More or less, yeah.
Yeah.
next summer we were allowed to use the kidney-shaped pool over at the Rafter 6 Ranch.
That's when the Gwynns were still there.
You know,
Right.
and this was fine for the little kids, but of course the big kids got dizzy swimming around. So through that winter, we helped raise money to put heat into the Anglican Church camp pool, and then we taught the
Swimming.
rest of the time I was involved. We were teaching
That's
over
great.
there, and when the Newcombs moved away from Seebe, let me see now. I guess that's when Phyllis Tomlin, the wife of the superintendent at Bow Valley Park, came to work with me
On the pool.
on teaching.
Okay.
And then one of our graduates, Northcott,
Virginia.
no, the son,
Oh, Michael.
Mike Northcott, worked with me for one summer.
Right.
And
Yeah,
then
that's right.
when I stopped in 1970, another of our graduates, Leanne Petrie, took over. And I don't know how much longer she taught there.
Right. That's great. That's an interesting program for a small
Yes,
town.
it was, because we had all the kids
Yeah.
in Seebe able to look after themselves in the water. And
Bo-
the Linda Brewster from Brewster Ranch
Right.
came over and took lessons too. I can't remember.
Linda Brewster, that would be.
Linda runs Rusticana.
Oh.
Cooper,
Cooper, yeah.
yeah. And,
That's interesting. And I know that photography played a big role in your life as well. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Actually, Joyce and Keith Cole had met some people. They were quite keen with their photography, and they had met some people from Foothills Camera Club in Calgary,
Right.
and they encouraged them to get a camera club started in Seebe. And so Joyce and Keith talked to a bunch of us, and we thought this would be a great idea. And most of us had not been serious about it at all up
Right.
till then. I mean, we took pictures like everybody does. But that was all. And then they, while we were talking about forming the club, the Stampede City exhibition was coming up, and again, we were persuaded to enter pictures into the competition in there, and a couple of us got acceptances. We thought, gee, we didn't know we were that good. We got very enthusiastic about all this, and we joined, after the club was formed, we joined the Color Photography Association of Canada.
We organized our club in 1959.
Yes, yeah. So, well, first interest was 58, but wasn't really going till 59, I guess. And
It was then the Seebe Camera
the
Club.
Seebe Camera Club,
Okay.
yeah. And after several years, we were getting people, we even had people from Lake Louise coming down to our
Oh,
meetings.
is that right?
And people from Cochrane.
And people from Banff, of course.
And people from Banff, yes. So we said, well, this is silly calling it the Seebe Camera Club, and we were also alternating our meetings between the Seebe Community Hall and the Spray Community Hall up here. And so we changed it to the Bow Valley Camera Club. And we did very well. We entered all the national competitions and so on, and some of us started exhibiting in the salons. And one time, it just shows you the attitudes of some people. We were doing very well. And one year, we came third in Canada for our nature photography.
Wow.
And one of the guys says, you may remember Bill DeHaan?
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the guys says, what's the use? We're never going to win. And here we'd won against the Toronto Guild and the Hamilton Camera Club and all the great big clubs with
Winnipeg,
200 and 300 members, you know.
Yeah.
And here were we with about 20 odd members.
Yeah. But you had the good resource
And
of
you
the
were,
scenery.
that's about the time you would have joined in the
Yeah.
in the
75.
mid-60s. Was
I didn't come here till 75.
75, was it? Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. So you were only in it for 3 years then,
Yeah.
because we, unfortunately, those of us who had been doing all the work for 20 years, the Coles and the Atkinsons and Bill DeHaan
And the Smiths.
and the Smiths were getting pretty tired of it. I mean, it was to the point where we were, okay, I was president last year, I'll be competition chairman this year, just for a change, you know. And we were switching around, and we kept saying to other people, you know, why don't you get into it? Oh, we don't know how to do it. Well, neither did we when we started. And we'll tell you what to do. Nope, no results. So finally Bert. And Michael Vincent came forward and said they'd go on the executive, which was very nice, except that you became the family
Social services.
social services guy in Canmore. So who's busier in the evenings?
Yeah.
So that did it for Bert. And then Michael Vincent ended up teaching the adult art classes, adult education classes on Camera Club night. And we said, that's it. So we had just bought this house. We'd been in it for 2 weeks. It was at the end of November. And so in the middle of December, we had the Camera Club Christmas party here, and it was also our farewell party for the Camera Club. And everybody parted friends. And
We had no club equipment.
No.
Whoever was showing slides brought their own
equipment.
projector and screen and so on. We didn't have anything to get rid of.
And then that sort of was the end of the poor old Camera Club. And then the next thing was that they started the Canmore Artists and Artisans Guild here. So I was talking to them, it wasn't that at the time, but a bunch of the artists and photographers here had gotten together and put this show on at the seniors.
That's right.
And I was there talking to them, and I says, well, you know, I don't do my own printing, or, oh, that doesn't matter, it's the picture that counts, and so on. You should join this club we're starting. And so Mary and I both said okay, and did. And that was when the guild started.
Interesting.
And so we personally didn't miss the Camera Club very much after that.
But we had never had prints
No,
made. There's
so we
always
were
just been
getting our
transparencies.
prints made in Calgary.
Great.
And we did a number of instructional programs that we gave to different
And you
camera.
gave showings on behalf of, in the CAG.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and, you know, talks on composition and all that kind of stuff.
But this was not at CAG. This was back when the Camera Club was
Well, yes,
in
but
action.
we did some of that early years in CAG too. One of our photography adventures was way back in the early 70s. We thought it would be great to have a photography school in the Rockies. And we had some notable photographer friends who said they would come to lecture there and so on. And we heard that the tea house at Gap Lake was up for sale, and all that property. There's something like 7 acres there, I think. And all along the lakefront there. And we thought, boy, that'd be great. And we had it all figured out where we put our down payment down on it. It wasn't the original owners that had the tea house by that time. It had been turned into a residence. And we had given them a down payment, and we were starting to make our plans where the photography school building would go and so on.
And not being alert enough to know that we should have had a lawyer involved from the very beginning.
Yeah, and so Canmore was really enthusiastic because it was this is where people were going to stay when they came. And the forestry okayed it, and the MD, or ID at that time, I guess it was, they thought it was a great idea. And there didn't seem to be any opposition. And all of a sudden, wham, we got shot between the eyes, so to speak. This guy from the highways department came and said it was an unsafe turnoff.
Yeah.
And he put the kibosh on the whole thing.
Also, they were talking at that time of widening 1A, and they were going to have to take in that property.
Yes, well, they did widen 1A, and they never took it in.
You still have a driveway there.
And still the same old driveway into what's now the picnic ground and Fisherman's Haven in there. And
So we
that
lost our down payment.
we lost our down payment, and that was the end of our photography school adventure.
But not many people know that there used to be a tea house and a residence there.
No, and It was started by some Exshaw people.
Arthur Court?
Yes, the Courts. Yeah. And they had this tea house for years and years. And it was very popular with people driving to Banff.
Because it was a long drive from Banff
Yes,
to Calgary.
bumpy old gravel road. and
Nice to
everything.
have a stop for a cup of tea.
On the shores of Gap Lake. It was very pleasant. So anyway, after that, of course, the building was torn down, and all of a sudden we find out they're making a picnic ground out of it, and we thought, boy, this guy from Highways sure gave us a completely ruined it for us, and there were way more people going in for fishing and picnicking there than we ever would have had coming in for the photography school.
And another neighbor that you had was the Mickey Bailey's.
Yeah, well, he came and rented the house from us while we were going through all this.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. And we had a few nice parties there and so on, and
But he had his game farm down
at the,
at the
On the edge of the
It
reserve
was
there.
actually on the edge of the reserve. And there were some delightful stories came out of that, because they had quite a interesting collection of animals. Mickey Bailey had been a photographer for Disney at one time,
Oh,
and his wife was very interested in the animal part of it. She was an artist. The top painting on the right there is one of hers, but she was also expert at handling the animals, and so they were raising different ones. They had cougars and at one time a black panther and
wolves,
right.
and
cougars.
they would then rent them out to somebody who needed an animal for their
For a show.
show or their
advertisement.
advertising or whatever.
A lot of
And,
advertising work.
There was the one delightful story about a bus driver who pulled into the Cochrane bus station. And he says, "You won't believe it. We were driving down the highway there near Seebe, and here was a woman out walking with a black panther on a leash." The panther had got away, and she'd gone out and found it and was taking it back along the highway.
Yeah.
And
Now, Mickey Bailey's place didn't last very long, did it?
Well, I'm trying to remember, must have been about 5 years.
but then I think they split up.
Yeah,
And-
I don't think, there was all sorts of funny stuff going on there that we didn't know about.
Some animals were shot, if I remember.
Well, yes, and nobody knows who did it.
Some
Some people were accusing Mickey of doing it, and other people were saying somebody who hated him had come in and done it. And they
somebody
never
else-
did find out who did it.
No, somebody claimed that it was someone who had worked for him and wanted to get even with Mickey because he hadn't paid him well enough, but we never did hear.
No, so anyway, that was the end of that.
Mickey and Kathy went their separate ways, and
Yeah.
she took the two girls.
Interesting.
Yeah, well, they not only rented the place at Gap Lake, but they built their own house at the animal
The animal, yes.
farm.
Oh, at the right at the game farm.
Yeah.
The game farm.
It was quite a nice house, and it was there for a long time. And
But it was on the
the
reserve.
natives had taken it over, and it
I don't know if it even
went
still
racking
exists.
around.
It's probably foundations now and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, it is, I'm sure.
When you're going into the quarry,
Into the Yamnuska parking lot.
Yeah,
um,
it's on the right hand
there's
side.
right down near the highway, there's I guess there's still a gate in the fence, and that's where you used to go into the the game farm.
Yeah, and I think the foundation of the house must still be up on the slope there.
Yeah, maybe.
Now we also suggested some discussion of the loader.
Loader's Lime.
Yes, well, Loader's Lime is very interesting. It starts with the gap. There was a lime kiln started there back in the early part of the 1900s, and it was owned by people by the name of Butchert. And they were the people that eventually moved to Victoria and had a lime quarry and plant out there. And that's what they turned into Butchert's Gardens eventually.
Sure, I've been there.
And you hear people in Victoria referring to it as Bouchard's Garden now. And
I had a high school teacher in Olds who was a niece of,
Oh, I see.
and she was Thelma Butchert.
yeah, so these people that tried to make it French, I don't know what.
No,
Anyway, did the Loaders
Then the Loaders bought that lime kiln, but then they opened the one at Kananaskis.
right.
And that was Loader's Lime until well up into the late 70s at least, when then it became Continental Lime, and I don't know who else. I've lost track.
Right now it's Greymont.
Greymont.
Steel Brothers was there as well.
But originally there had been a station and post office down on the flats below where the old plant and houses were there. And I think there were, I understand there were maybe 8 or 10 houses down there. And when I first went to Seebe, you would walk over there and you could still see traces of the foundations. And the last time Mary and I were down looking, we couldn't find anything except there were a few cobblestone walk liners, as though they'd gone through somebody's garden to a house or something. That was all. Now I don't know if you can even find that anymore. So, and the houses that are still there, the oldest ones, quite nice looking cottages that are more or less back in the woods.
That's
there,
right.
Up that little valley, are some of the original houses with the lime kiln. And they were also, there was one that's gone that was the residence for the park gatekeeper family. And this Joyce Cole I mentioned that's helped start the camera club, she was the daughter of the couple that were the first gatekeepers.
And there are, if you know where to look, right at the Kananaskis area now, down in the ditch, a few old
Foundations.
concrete foundations.
Yes, and I had understood she had said that was where the gate had been, but with all the pictures we see, the gate was up on top of the hill before you went down that dip there where the first houses were, and where the first lime kiln houses were. And I think that what Joyce had probably said was that's where their house used to be, where that foundation by the road is.
But she used to tell the story that they had no school in the village of Kananaskis. They went to Exshaw, and they used to walk to school. And very often it was so windy, it was blowing sand and stuff, they'd turn around and walk backwards to get to Exshaw.
And you know, there've been stories that the sand flats or silt flats at Lac des Arcs were caused by TransAlta's power plants upstream, which was ridiculous because if anything, the power plants had all the silt in the mountain streams had settled in their reservoirs. And Joyce said that when she was walking to school in Exshaw, she says it wasn't just dust from the cement plant that was blowing. She said it was sand off Lac des Arcs. And that was long before there were any dams on the Bow River at all. So.
And then you were going to return because you didn't get this onto the tape, the explanation of who he was and what happened to him.
Yes, at Seebe there is a grave behind where the machine shops and offices are now, with concrete tombstone with George Johnson on it, and nothing else, no dates or anything, and there's still a fence around the grave. And nobody knew anything about it except this fellow had drowned when fighting ice at Kananaskis plant. Well, I think it was around 1919, if I remember. And this frazzle ice is something that is still plaguing the plants at Seebe. When, with the Chinooks and so on, there's still a lot of open water on the rivers feeding down the bowl. And when we get these howling winds and it's below zero, the water gets super chilled, super cooled, and it actually drops below freezing point, but because it's swift moving water, it doesn't solidify until it hits a rock or hits the racks, intake racks at the power plants. And
These are big metal
wooden.
To prevent objects from going through the
to keep
penstock.
other objects
Yes,
out
feeding
there,
into the penstocks of the power plants.
floating debris.
And so it hits the racks and all these crystals form, plugging the racks up. And it was, this fellow was out, everybody went out with rakes. And sometime before I came, they worked at it from a raft out front or from a handy ice floe if I was there, raking the ice crystals off the racks to keep water flowing to the generators. And this fellow had been working by himself and fell in and drowned, and they found him plugging the racks. So that was the end of poor George Johnson. And he didn't have any immediate relatives or anything, so he was buried at Seebe. And a long time after that, Al Petrie and I were at the control center by this time, and this lady came and was trying to find her grandfather or great-grandfather who had died in Seebe.
Oh.
And we asked, what was the name? Well, it was Johnson. And we asked some more questions, and he had apparently died out here, and nobody could afford to do anything to bring his body back or anything. And they were a family from down east. And she had heard these stories when she was growing up and decided she was going to see if she could find out anything. So it was kind of a...
You were able to take her out and
Yes,
show her.
we took her and showed her the grave. And
Give some people closure, I'm sure.
yeah, oh yes. Yeah.
Well, we've covered quite a lot of ground. Is there any other highlights that you'd like to mention, Mary,
No.
of your colorful life?
Well, I don't know about my colorful life, but back to Seebe, we had a lot of interesting activities during Canada's centennial.
Yeah.
For one thing, we cleaned up the old Seebe garbage truck and decorated it and entered a float in the Canmore July 1st parade
All right.
and won first prize for out-of-town float. We were the only out-of-town float.
That's
Oh,
great.
there's one from Banff, Mary, don't,
No, that was the next year.
oh, that was the next
We
year.
came
We
back with
won
a-
first prize again.
We came back the next year with
Yeah.
another one and won first best for out-of-town float. But we had a number of activities.
Yeah.
Elena Torn, the wife of Mike Torn, the
I remember
machinist,
her, yeah.
and I organized a hobby fair for the children because it was quite interesting the number of different hobbies that the children had. So we had this hobby fair one weekend, and there were coin collections and stamp collections and
Yeah.
all
Great.
sorts of different interesting things the kids were doing. And then we had a centennial ball, one of our regular dances, and everybody was to dress representing somebody from Canada's history. So the school teacher, who was Jack Davidson, made an outstanding our first Prime Minister,
Oh, Johnny McDonald.
Johnny
Yes.
MacDonald, was dressed like it and was going around pontificating and so on. And
I was going as a prospector, and I didn't have my own beard at the time, and I had this false beard to stick on, and a bunch of old clothes, and a rough-looking pack sack, and so that was going to be my costume. And I was at the store one day, and Ken Lister said that he had to throw out this side of bacon the remains of a side of bacon that had started to go rancid. And I said, Ken, can I have that? And I put it in this pack sack. Went smelling like a real old prospector to the Centennial Ball. It was lots of fun.
Not very formal.
Not very formal. And, there was everything. It was amazing, the costumes.
yeah, Cheryl Shannon and her husband were living there then, and Russ came dressed as a priest, and forgotten Cheryl was just
She was a dance hall girl or something.
But anyway, mention of Ken Lister, we haven't mentioned the Seebe store particularly.
That's right. Go ahead and tell us about
Well,
it.
Bob can give the early
Yeah.
history.
When I first came to Seebe, it was run by the Kananaskis Ranch.
By the Brewsters.
Yeah. And there's a chap by the name of Mike Crosby ran the store for Brewsters.
Yeah.
And at that time it was pretty basic. There were root vegetables, and they used to get milk on the train all the time. Incidentally, the trains in Seebe, there were three each way, one each way that was scheduled to stop, and you could flag any of the rest of them
Every single day?
every single day.
And there was a Seebe station,
And there was a Seebe
was
station, a little
an
one.
old railway boxcar.
No, it was a regular building, Mary.
Anyway,
A typical siding station.
Yeah.
And so You know, we had fresh milk and all that every day.
Yeah.
So it wasn't too bad that way, but it was very basic. And then a fellow by the name of Gibson, who we call Gibby, took the store over, still working for Brewster's. And he didn't do very well. And it was after him that the Listers bought it outright.
Yeah.
They probably came after the war, after.
Oh
Ken.
yes, this is getting up into the, well, it was before we were married,
Yeah.
but it was about 1952 or something, I think they came.
And the Seebe post office.
Yeah, the post office was
run
in
out
the
of
store. And so the Listers had it right up until Ken decided to retire. And they
Sometime in the 80s, right?
Pardon?
In the 80s sometime, right?
Yeah. And after the Listers left, it had several different owners, and the final one started a little cafe at the back of the store, and in the summertime a patio out at the side. And then the end of Seebe came, and along with it the end of the store and the cafe.
But
So that
also,
was kind of sad.
with the development of Bow Valley Park, they got a lot of business from people wanting to come down and buy
Sure.
supplies there.
Yeah.
It's-
You had these two big guest ranches next to you, close to you, one,
Yeah,
the
well,
Rafter 6 and
One was, the Rafter 6 was owned by Alvin and Eva Gwynn,
yeah,
and they had started, actually a fellow by the name of Soapy Smith, no relation to the Yukon one, had it originally, and
Eva was his.
Eva was his wife, and he died, and Eva married Alvin Gwynn, who had been one of the ranch hands. And so they were there for decades, and it was a very popular place, very friendly and quiet, and excellent horses and so on and so forth. And Alvin was one of the noted guides in the mountains here. And Gwynn Pass is named after him.
as you approach Rafter 6 Ranch, there are cabins along the left-hand side.
Oh, yes.
Who owns those? How do they fit in?
One of them was Belmore Brown, who was a noted artist from New York, who did dioramas for the New York Natural History Museum and so on, and painted a lot of landscapes here in the
Right.
Rockies. And his son George Brown took the place over after him.
Okay, good.
And he had it until George died. And he was also an artist. And then, Calgary Artist had the second one. Oh dear. My brain's getting soft. He was a well-known Calgary artist anyway. Had the second one, and then George Baltistritis had the third cabin, and I believe he was, I'm not sure, I think he was a geologist
Yes.
from Calgary. Yes, because Jim and Doris knew them, that's right. Oh, one thing about Seebe. Not only did they have the one sheet of artificial curling ice, but they also, in later years, built a ball diamond that was the best one in the valley. And it was very popular. They were even intercity even tournaments. There were people coming down from Edmonton, teams from there and everything. And it was great. There was a camping area there for people that wanted to stay, and so they'd have these tournaments every year there, and then there were all sorts of local games just with Exshaw and Banff and
Right.
whatnot. And the ball diamond is still there. That's one part of Seebe that's not been wiped out.
But it's got
But
poplar
it's
trees
got,
growing
yes, the
all
poplar trees are starting to grow up in the middle of the diamond and everything. So it's slowly disappearing. The Morley folks were going to take it over and look after it. And they cut down a bunch of these little aspen trees that were springing up all over, and that's it. Suddenly nothing's happened. And
I have a feeling the aspen trees might win that one.
Yes.
they're going to, I'm sure.
And you may have heard about the totem pole that was at the ballpark. When Bill Tomlin came to start Bow Valley Park, he had a team of trusty convicts working for him, clearing for roads and so on. I mean, he was building, they had been down at Boundary before, and then he was
That is, the Tomlins would be
That's
down
the Tomlins
at the
had been
boundary
at
station.
Boundary. And so then he was brought up to start up Bow Valley Park, and he had this group of I gather, mostly native convicts working for him. And one of them carved a totem pole for Bill, telling he wasn't a West Coast person, but he understood that totem poles were supposed to tell your family story. So he carved this totem pole, which was quite interesting.
Because it had a new lady
A
at the
very
top.
buxom new lady in it in some place.
And that was, she was there because this woman had been his downfall when he started to drink and get into trouble.
Anyway,
And the rest of it was all animals and so on, just like the West Coast ones.
so he gave this totem pole to Bill Tomlin
And Bill
So
had
he
it up
put it up
in their front
in
yard.
the front yard. And then after Bill died and Phyllis and the children had to leave, they were moving out to Summerland, British Columbia, and it was going to cost them thousands of dollars to take this totem pole to get it shipped out there. And so they donated it to the Seebe ballpark, and it was put up there and was
It was there
was
until
there
CB
until the
folded.
Seebe closed. And Phyllis is now gone, and the two children
Aren't
didn't-
interested.
weren't interested, or nor did they want to pay to have it shipped. So,
So
not
is
west,
the
not
pole
west.
still there?
No,
One of the Cummings boys,
the youngest, Terry
Terry Cummings,
Cummings,
bought it and
Yes.
moved it up. He's got an acreage up
at Water Valley.
Water Valley way.
So that's,
So that's where the totem pole is now.
I don't know whether he bought it or if the kids just told him to take it.
Yeah, probably they just told him to take it.
But anyway, it's,
Well, one thing we haven't spent a lot of detail on is the work that you did with Calgary Power. Do you want to say anything more about that?
Oh, well, when I went there temporarily, I was a floorman, which meant that you scrubbed the floors and wiped up the oil and went up to the gatehouse to take the water levels every hour. And that applied to both Kananaskis and Horseshoe. I worked at both of them. But then I became a plant operator, and there again at both Kananaskis and Horseshoe. And that's when they started to automate all the new plants coming on the line. And built the control center
In Seebe.
Seebe.
Yeah.
And
Which
that was
was-
controlling all the power for the southern part of the province. We were tied in with the city of Edmonton. And when they built the steam thermal plants at Wabamun, they were TransAlta, Calgary Power still at that time, their power plants, so we were dispatching their operation. We weren't running them, but we were telling them when we needed more generation or less and so on.
However,
They were
can't-
base,
you
pretty
can't
well
start
based
and
plants.
stop a steam plant very quickly.
No,
So
it
they
takes a long
provided the
time.
base load, and they used the hydro plants to meet the fluctuating
Yes.
demands.
Oh, I see.
And the
Because you
controls-
could do that at the flick of a switch, right?
Yeah, well, we pushed buttons to start the generators from the control center. Yeah.
And control center at Seebe was part of Kananaskis plant,
Yes,
which is
it's,
still there, but the control center has been moved into Calgary.
yes, and it's not anything like Carroll Control Center, which was designed by one of our operators, his name of Malcolm Clark. And in the latest anniversary, 100th anniversary book that the TransAlta put out, there's no mention of the fact that the entire provincial time control was run by a little gadget of clocks at Kananaskis Control Center, which was built by the superintendent at the time, Fred Gaskell. And there's no mention that the control center itself was designed by Malcolm Clark. And
Apparently
this
they were
is-
mentioned in the 75-year one.
Yes, the 75-year book has all about them. But they were lost by the time we had our 100th anniversary.
Which TransAlta celebrated last year.
And old Bob Smith gets his picture in every darned one of these books.
Well, you were obviously a key player in the whole
Well, no,
scheme of things.
I was not. I mean, compared to this Malcolm Clark and Fred Gaskell and a few other people, I was just one of the
Right.
But they took your picture
dispatchers, and I
operating
was
the control
eventually the
center.
assistant superintendent, and that was it. But they had taken a picture of me when the control center was still young, and they've been using it in pamphlets and everything ever since. It's ridiculous. And the new control center in Calgary has no similarity to the old one at all. It's,
And it controls only the hydro.
Yeah.
yes, well, the last 7 months I was working, I had moved into Calgary, and just me, I didn't drag Mary with me. And at that time, we were still looking after all the line switching and everything from the control center there. And now, it's all split up into Fortis and all these other outfits. You don't know where your bills are coming from anymore. And
We started off this interview with talking about your birthplace in Minnewanka, which is now underwater.
yeah,
And I saw the other day I was handed a newspaper article, and I wish I had it with me. I had made up my mind to take it with me, of a diver that went, picture taken by a diver. That showed a water pump, a hand water pump. And I just wonder whether you would have recognized it. You've got all kinds of history here.
yeah.